people come to New York for the big landmarks, but if you want to feel the city's real personality, come to the Lower East Side. This neighborhood's packed with immigrant history, legendary food, old-school New York character, and streets that still feel alive with stories. So, today we're spending one day exploring one of Manhattan's most fascinating neighborhoods. Let's explore the Lower East Side. Day 1. Discovering the Lower East Side. Morning. Breakfast at Russ Daughters Café. Look, if you're exploring the Lower East Side, you have to start your morning at the Russ Daughters Café on Orchard Street. Just make sure you don't confuse it with their original retail counter in Houston. This is the sit-down spot, and it looks like a beautiful, bright, retro 1950s diner. Make sure you jump on Ressie and book a table a few days early, because if you just roll up as a walk-in, the wait list is an absolute nightmare. I ordered the classic bagel with Gaspé Nova smoked salmon and cream cheese. A lot of New York joints serve giant fluffy pillow bagels, but these are old school. Small, dense, and really chewy. The salmon's the real standout because it's hand-sliced paper thin. It has this silky, buttery texture that completely ruins normal grocery store locks for you. Expect to pay around $30 once you factor in the city tax and tip. It's a heavy hit to the wallet for a single bagel plate, but the quality is entirely unmatched. The Tenement Museum. Right after breakfast, I walked down the block to the Tenement Museum. If you're spending a day on the Lower East Side, this is one spot I really urge you to experience. Instead of a typical museum where you just stare at old artifacts behind glass cases, they take you directly inside the actual preserved apartment buildings where thousands of working-class immigrant families lived. I took a tour of a flat that was only 325 square feet, split into 3 cramped rooms. Looking around at that tiny footprint, I found myself completely tuning out the historical dates and facts. I just kept trying to imagine what everyday life actually felt like when you had 7 or 8 people cooking, sleeping, and working sweatshop shifts in a space that small. The hallways are kept completely dark and unrenovated with layers of peeling wallpaper, which gives you this heavy claustrophobic connection to the families who are here. Tickets are $30 flat, and you absolutely have to book ahead online since the tour groups are kept tiny to fit inside the rooms. Insider tip. On their website, they offer both indoor apartment tours and outdoor neighborhood walking tours. Make sure to book an apartment tour. Getting inside those physical, untouched historic rooms is where the real magic of this place happens. Museum at Eldridge Street. My next stop was the Museum at Eldridge Street, which sits inside an incredibly historic synagogue from 1887. When you walk up the stairs from the plain lower level into the main sanctuary, the room opens up into this massive space with a giant, glowing blue and gold stained glass window at the front. Eastern European Jewish immigrants built this place, but it was completely abandoned by the mid-20th century. It sat rotting for decades with leaking roofs and pigeons nesting inside until a massive 20-year-old restoration saved it. The details they brought back are amazing, like the hand-painted ceilings and giant chandeliers. If you look closely at the wooden floors up in the balcony where the women sat, you can see physical grooves worn right into the wood from generations of people shuffling their feet during prayer. Admission is $15. It's well worth stepping inside even if religious sites aren't normally your thing, just to see the piece of the neighborhood's actual history still standing. Insider tip. Double check the calendar before you go, because it's a Jewish historic site and still functions as an active house of worship. They're strictly closed on Fridays and Saturdays for the Sabbath, along with major Jewish holidays. If you want to save a few bucks, Mondays are pay what you wish for admission. Late morning, Chinatown. I walked a few blocks over from the synagogue and immediately had to slow my pace because the sidewalks hanging in the shop windows, people crowding around the outdoor stacks to pick through fresh ginger, and the sweet scent of bakeries mixing with open-air seafood markets. I wanted some real context on how this community built itself up, so I headed over to the Museum of Chinese in America on Center Street. Tickets are $15, and just a heads up, they're closed on Mondays and Tuesdays. The gallery focuses heavily on the raw, personal histories of the early immigrants and the massive hurdles they faced building lives here. Seeing those personal diaries and old photographs completely changes how you look at the streets right outside the front door. From there, I made my way toward the approach of the Manhattan Bridge to find the Mahayana Buddhist Temple. It looks like a standard city storefront from the sidewalk, but you step inside and you're suddenly looking at this massive 16-foot golden Buddha sitting on a lotus flower. It's completely free to enter, but you should definitely bring a $1 bill to buy a handwritten fortune scroll from the counter. Next, I headed down Mott and Grand Streets to check out the market stalls filled with fresh rambutan and durian fruit before ending the morning over at Columbus Park. It's a great place to sit on a bench and watch the neighborhood's older residents gathering to play mahjong and traditional instruments. Insider tip: when navigating Chinatown, skip the giant multi-lane headache of Canal Street entirely if you want to actually enjoy your walk. Stick to the narrower, parallel side streets like Bayard Street, Pell Street, or Doyers Street instead. These streets are packed with historic storefronts, hidden gift shops, and traditional bakeries, and you can get across the neighborhood without fighting the massive crowds of commuters and bridge traffic. Afternoon, lunch at Nom Wah Tea Parlor. By the time I finished walking the neighborhood, I was starving, so I tracked down a lunch spot tucked away on Doyers Street called Nom Wah Tea Parlor. It's been running since 1920 and feels like a faded 1950s diner that happens to serve dim sum, complete with worn-out red vinyl booths and old checkered tile floors. They hand you a paper sheet and a golf pencil to check off what you want, and I went straight for the pork soup dumplings, the roast pork buns, and their famous OG egg rolls. The pork bun was the ultimate comfort food, just this massive pillowy steamed bun stuffed with sweet caramelized barbecue pork. But the egg roll is the real wild card. They wrap chicken and veggies inside a thick egg crepe instead of a normal wrapper, batter it, and deep fry it. It's huge, greasy, and has this heavy, dense crunch to it. Lunch ran me about $25, and to be completely honest, a lot of locals think this place is a bit of a tourist trap because you can get sharper, fresher dumplings down the street at the big banquet halls. But for me, sitting in that noisy, century-old dining room with a hot plate of pork buns was entirely worth it for the old-school vibe. Just make sure you hit an ATM first, because they only take cash or American Express. Local shops of the Lower East Side. Once lunch was out of the way, it was time to hit some local shops, and this corner of the Lower East Side has a few legendary spots that have survived for decades. I started over on Rivington Street and ducked into Economy Candy. The place has been open since 1937, and walking inside is a total sensory overload. It's just this narrow, chaotic warehouse with boxes of sugar stacked all the way to the ceiling. I thought I'd just grab a quick bag of gummies and hit the road, but I got completely sidetracked tracking down random retro candy bars and weird international sweets that I used to obsess over as a kid. It's virtually impossible to walk through there without pointing at a shelf and saying, "Oh my god, I forgot that even existed!" After tearing myself away from the sugar, I walked a few blocks over to East Houston Street to check out Russ Daughters. If you want true old-school Lower East Side history, this is the Holy Grail. They've been serving traditional Jewish appetizing foods here since 1914. The shop still has its beautiful vintage neon sign outside and the original light-up display cases inside. I wasn't hungry enough for a full meal, but I couldn't resist grabbing a quick snack for their classic arugula pastries. Standing at the corner watching the staff slice smoked salmon with absolute precision gives you this amazing glimpse into the old New York that you just can't replicate anywhere else. Sara D. Roosevelt Park. After spending most of the day on my feet, I ended up cutting through Sara D. Roosevelt Park for a quick break. It's a long neighborhood park that runs between the Lower East Side and Chinatown, and for a few minutes I was happy to do absolutely nothing. I found a bench, finished my drink, and watched a baseball game that was already in full swing on the court nearby. The courts here are a huge deal in the city's street ball scene. The guys playing were absolutely flying across the concrete while people lined up along the chain fence to yell and cheer. Around me, people were walking dogs, chatting with friends, or simply passing through. It felt less like a place visitors come to see and more like a place people actually use. It's definitely not a manicured, postcard pretty park. It's loud, a little rough around the edges, and completely run by the locals. Late afternoon, Williamsburg Bridge Walk. Next up was the Williamsburg Bridge, so I headed over to the entrance at Delancey Street. This path is basically a massive mile-long steel cage painted entirely in fading pink. It's a steep, steady incline that definitely wakes your calves up. But compared to the absolute nightmare of dodging crowds and selfie sticks on Brooklyn Bridge, this is one mostly used by local runners and commuters. You can actually walk at a normal human pace without squeezing past people. The whole walkway is covered in layers of local graffiti, and as you get higher up, you look right through the fence down at the East River and the Manhattan skyline. The most intense part is definitely the subway tracks running right next to the path on the same level. When a J or M train comes screaming past, the noise is completely deafening and the entire metal structure rattles under your sneakers. It completely takes over your senses for a few seconds. I walked out far enough to get those wide-open views above the river, watched a couple of trains rattle past, and then turned back around toward the Lower East Side. Early evening, Little Italy. For my last stop of the day, I wanted to explore Little Italy. The neighborhood's actually a 2-block stretch of Mulberry Street right on the edge of Chinatown. So tiny that you can walk the entire loop in 5 minutes flat. The moment you step onto the street, you're running a gauntlet of restaurant barkers. Every single place has a guy standing out on the sidewalk with a laminated menu, trying to hustle you into a table. It's loud, chaotic, and a tourist trap, but seeing the green, white, and red flags strung up between the fire escapes is a classic New York visual. I spent my time looking at the old architecture. I passed historic tenement buildings, the famous Audrey Hepburn Memorial painted on the side of Cafe Roma, and the old St. Patrick's Old Cathedral hiding behind a massive brick wall just a block over. It takes barely any time to walk through, but it's an iconic pocket of Manhattan that you have to experience at least once. Insider tip. If you choose to come here in the afternoon from Chinatown instead, skip the generic lunch spots and hunt down the historic specialty shops that have survived for a century. Walk into Deep Hollow's Fine Foods. The smell of aged provolone and cured prosciutto hits you the second you open the door. Grab some fresh mozzarella to go, or hit up one of the old-school bakeries down the block for an espresso and a cannoli while you take in the street scene. Dinner at Rubirosa. For dinner, I locked in a table at Rubirosa right on Mulberry Street. By the time I sat down, I already knew exactly what I was ordering. The tie-dye pizza is the absolute crown jewel of their menu, and seeing it land on almost every single table around the dining room completely confirmed it. The crust here is ridiculously thin and crispy, basically a wafer-thin tavern style, and they swirl vodka sauce, tomato sauce, and fresh pesto right over the mozzarella. It looks like a total gimmick, but the sweet vodka sauce mixed with the sharp pesto hits perfectly. I went with the small pizza for $33, which is plenty for one person, but if you're splitting with a group, grab the large for $41. The dining room is constantly packed to the brim and loud, so you'll definitely want to grab a reservation weeks in advance. Otherwise, you'll join the massive crowd of people waiting for hours on the sidewalk. Useful info for spending a day in the Lower East Side. Best time to visit the Lower East Side. To get the most out of the Lower East Side, I'd pick either spring or fall. This is a neighborhood that's best explored on foot, and spending the day wandering between the Lower East Side, Chinatown, Little Italy, and the Williamsburg Bridge is far more enjoyable when the weather is comfortable. May, June, September, and October tend to be the sweet spot. Daytime temperatures are often somewhere between 18 degrees Celsius and 27 degrees Celsius, or 65 degrees Fahrenheit and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Warm enough to sit outside for lunch, but without the heavy heat that New York can get in the middle of the summer. Winter is still a good option if you don't mind cooler weather. Temperatures often range from -1 degrees Celsius to 8 degrees Celsius, or 30 degrees Fahrenheit to 46 degrees Fahrenheit. The streets are generally less crowded, and places like the Tenement Museum can feel a little more relaxed. The Williamsburg Bridge walk might be a tougher sell on a windy January afternoon, but the rest of the itinerary works well throughout the year. Airport tips. For a trip focused on the Lower East Side, I'd be happy flying into either LaGuardia or JFK. LaGuardia sits closest to the neighborhood and is often the quickest transfer, while JFK tends to offer the widest choice of international flights. From LaGuardia, you're roughly 30 to 45 minutes from the Lower East Side depending on traffic, with taxi fares falling between $35 and $60. JFK is a little farther away, and the journey into Manhattan usually takes 45 minutes to an hour. Tickets cost between $70 and $100, while the AirTrain and subway combination comes in at about $11 and is by far the cheaper option. Newark is also worth considering if you find a better flight deal. The transfer takes longer, but not enough I'd pay significantly more just to avoid it. You don't need a car in New York, especially for an itinerary like this one. Between walking and public transport, you'll have no trouble reaching any of the places covered in this guide, and skipping the rental car means avoiding parking fees, traffic, and the headaches that come with driving in Manhattan. Where to stay? The good news is you don't need to stay directly in the Lower East Side to make this day work. Anywhere around Nolita, Chinatown, the East Village, or the Lower East Side itself will keep you close to everything covered in the guide. The Lower East Side is the obvious choice if you want to be right in the middle of the action. Chinatown is often the better value option and still places restaurants, museums, and food spots within easy reach. Nolita tends to be a little more upscale, with boutique hotels, stylish cafes, and some of the nicest streets in the area. The East Village sits slightly farther north, but makes up for it with a huge selection of bars, restaurants, and nightlife. Hotel prices vary enormously depending on the season and property itself. Budget-friendly options generally start around $150 to $250 per night. Mid-range hotels often fall between $250 and $450, while upscale properties can easily push beyond $500 per night. Personally, I'd narrow it down to either the Lower East Side or Nolita. Both let you start the day on foot without immediately worrying about trains, taxis, or figuring out your route across Manhattan. How to get around? One thing I like about this part of Manhattan is how little planning it requires. The Lower East Side, Chinatown, Little Italy, and Nolita flow naturally into one another, so most of the day is spent walking rather than thinking about transportation. For most of the route, my own feet did the job. Walking between stops never felt like a chore because some of the best food spots, small shops, and interesting streets weren't places I'd planned to visit at all. If you do need public transport, the subway is the easiest option. A single ride costs just over $3, and the stations are spread throughout the area, making it easy to reach other parts of Manhattan whenever you need to. As I mentioned earlier, a car isn't necessary here. Walking in the subway will cover just about everything, and both are far easier than dealing with Manhattan traffic and parking. Where to eat? The Lower East Side has no shortage of great spots, but if I had a few extra meals to throw into the mix, these are the exact places I'd hit first. For a total rite of passage New York experience, you have to stand in line at Katz's Delicatessen. They've been carving up giant pastrami sandwiches here since the 1800s, and despite the endless tourist hype, the meat absolutely lives up to the legend. A single massive pastrami sandwich will run you about $29, so realistically, expect to spend around $30 to $45 a person once you add a slice of fries or a drink. If you want a complete shift in vibe, check out Servo's. It's a tiny, high-energy neighborhood joint that skips the usual pizza and deli script for a coastal Spanish and Portuguese menu. They focus heavily on incredible raw bar selections, crispy shrimp heads, and amazing small plates to share. Depending on how many seafood dishes you stack up, you're looking at about $45 to $75 per person. For something completely unique, book a table at Dirt Candy. It's a Michelin-starred spot that only does a 5-course tasting menu built entirely around vegetables. They turn things like eggplant and carrots into mind-blowing fine dining dishes that will completely flip your idea of vegetarian food. The set menu itself is a flat $110 per person, but once you throw in tax and drinks, expect the total damage to be closer to $130 to $170. A bagel, dim sum, pizza, a bridge walk, and a crash course in New York history all packed into a single day. Not bad for one neighborhood. If you enjoyed this guide, hit like and subscribe for more travel itineraries. And if you have more than one day in New York, check out my ultimate New York bucket list right here.